I bring up all of these real examples because they are illustrations of how low the bar is. This is where we're at. They are examples of how carnal some Christians have allowed themselves to be. Examples of how immature some Christians have allowed themselves to behave. I have more examples besides these and worse ones. I do not bring them up to make individuals feel bad. If I wanted to make individuals feel bad, I could name specific church congregations and name names, but that's not what I want to do, and I do not think that would be particularly beneficial. I bring them up for real examples of what is being spoken in church groups and how we must aim higher and be better. That is, if we even want to. Most likely there is an excuse for every one of the examples I gave of unfitting speech. Excuses like, I misunderstood what was said, or can't you take a joke, or it was said in a certain context, etc. Or, of course, there is no perfect church. I did not misunderstand. Yes, I can take a joke if it is any good. I understood the context in which all of these examples happened. And I know that there is no perfect church, but let's not use that as an excuse to not do better. I'm used to the gaslighting of saying something that is so, isn't so, and coming up with every reason in the world why it isn't so, even if it makes no sense at all. Once I was in my vegetable garden. There were zucchini growing in the garden, and the person who was with me said something about cucumbers and zucchini being the same thing. I said, zucchini are not the same as cucumbers. And instead of accepting that fact, they said to me, in my mind they are the same. Okay, I guess we are now throwing objective truth out the window, and what matters is only what is in one's mind. I'm used to this. And it hasn't been an easy or painless road to get to this point of being used to gaslighting and seeing it for what it is. If it weren't so sad or frustrating, it is almost humorous, the things people will come up with to gaslight, to try to make something that is so not seem that way at all. And it takes determination to not be swayed by the nonsense. Once I brought up an issue with a pastor about something he had said, and was given the excuse that I had to know him to know what he meant. I had to know him to know what he meant. No, not really. If you are speaking clearly enough, what you say should be what you meant. Especially if you think you want to teach others, and potentially others who are new to you and who do not know you. I have learned a great deal from people who I do not know, because they spoke clearly. A great many books would be useless if you had to personally know the author to know what they meant. But in the end, I realized this excuse was not meant to be all that logical. It was just meant to be a way in which what he actually said did not need to be accounted for. It might help you to be aware that when you bring an issue up with someone, it is commonly turned around to be your fault and your issue, and not theirs at all. Typically, people don't want to hear it. They don't see it as an opportunity to be better. They see it as something uncomfortable and not nice. If one can get over their defensiveness and pride and accept an instruction or correction, they benefit from it. And I think not only will they personally benefit from it, but if they are a church leader, so will everyone else that they are shepherding. Do not correct a scoffer who foolishly ridicules and takes no responsibility for his error, or he will hate you. Correct a wise man who learns from his error, and he will love you. The messenger is not typically liked, I think. That's fine if someone doesn't like me. I don't need to be liked, just to listen to the message. That matters more. Sometimes a parent is disliked for enacting a correction, But if they are a good parent, what they are trying to do is for their child's long-term benefit, not what is enjoyed in the moment. That's another thing. When an issue is pointed out, it often gets personal. Defensiveness, fear, pride. Don't look at me and who I am. Look at what is being said and what is at hand. Look at the issue, not all the stuff surrounding it, or who is pointing it out, or who needs instruction. It takes a rare maturity and humility to see it this way. Another avoidance technique or excuse that I have experienced is that instead of looking at the issue at hand, it is my delivery of the correction that was the problem. I didn't say it nicely enough. I didn't communicate it the right way. My delivery could have been better. I can admit that sometimes my delivery could have been better. I am willing to say at times I could have done better at pointing something out nicely, even when by that time I can be so exasperated at the absolute senselessness of it that the emotion can be difficult to control. Even more when I point something out and then am immediately lied to in an attempt to cover it up. It can be difficult to compose myself in situations like that. I was tired of this being used as an excuse against me, though, as if my delivery itself is a reason not to listen to me. So one specific time I was aware of this beforehand. I was aware of delivering my instruction nicely. So I did deliver it nicely, even though it took a lot of strength to speak very nicely, while I could barely believe someone could be so senseless. I corrected and instructed them very nicely, on purpose, to see if it would make any difference at all in how they would receive the correction and instruction. I was curious to see if this was the key that I was missing. Perhaps if I was just nicer, they would receive the instruction. So I said it very nicely and calmly as if I were asking someone to please pass the butter at the dinner table. I chose my words fairly, as opposed to a biased way you could choose your words. The tone of my voice was calm. I was highly conscious of speaking clearly and fairly and calmly. Afterward, I waited for their reaction. I can tell you it was absolutely no better a reception than if I had yelled the correction at them. So I just share this with you as an example of that it can sometimes not matter at all how nice your delivery is or how you communicated something. It is how they receive it. If any of this message seems harsh, maybe that's a good thing. I hope we take our conduct seriously, especially those church leaders who actually teach others. This Christian life amounts to something. It isn't a game. I see more discipline in secular things such as sports, or the military, or even regular jobs that people have, than I do in the church and in our conduct as Christians. A coach pushes his football team to do better and not make excuses. I don't think it would fly for a football player, after dropping the ball, to tell his coach that, "I'm not perfect, nobody's perfect." I do not think the coach would accept that as an excuse at all, and what's more, I do not think a serious football player would even attempt that excuse with their coach. They know better than to try that. I have not been a football player nor a coach, but I do not think the coach is always hand-holding, coddling, and speaking sweetly and softly to his players in his attempt to get them to be better. Do you know what I mean? The coach is serious about it and is probably rather ruthless in the process, especially if his team is dropping the ball in the most immature ways. In the military, you are pushed physically and mentally. There is incredible discipline, not asked for, but demanded. In regular hourly jobs where people get paid minimum wage, there is discipline. If you mess up enough, you are fired. The "I'm not perfect" excuse will get you nowhere in these stations of life. Where is this discipline in the church? What about what Paul said? All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I am not just shadowboxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. Here is one thing God's people can be ruthless in putting to death their flesh, denying it at every turn. No mercy for it, as it produces nothing good and is a dysfunctional part in man. It is against God and His ways, and always is, and always will be. Do you remember where the Lord is addressing the 7 churches in the book of Revelations in the Bible, pointing out their issues? Do you think He will accept the excuse of, there is no perfect church? Do you think that covers over all the issues and so they don't need to be addressed? Because that is how I feel that excuse is used today. There is no perfect church. So I guess the logic that I am expected to accept with that is that it means we don't need to look at how we can do better. However, I do not accept that as an excuse. I can accept that there is no perfect church. That is abundantly obvious. But I do not accept that as an excuse for not trying to be better. Looking back on the topic of one of my recent videos called When the Orchestra Meets, and the question I asked about why do we as Christians meet together, and how it is so we can build each other up, I look at these examples I shared, and many more I have not shared, and can still ask myself that question: why do we as Christians meet together? At best, 50% of the time I go to a typical church service, I am not built up. I am disheartened and discouraged. 50% of the time at best, and more like 80% of the time. I mean, apparently no preacher has the goal of telling me anything I don't already know. I can hear the woe man joke again. I can hear about how the church leader likes weak-willed women. I can be told to be like a specific cartoon character repeatedly. I can be so very inspired as a woman by hearing that women are lovely, amazing, and should pray and cook for the men. And I can hear a pastor say that sex is the most important thing in marriage. And I am taking precious time on a Sunday morning to hear all this nonsense from my fellow Christians. Oh, but Daisy, there is no perfect church. We're all human. We all fall short. Nobody's perfect. I'm not interested in excuses. Raise the bar. Raise it much higher. Say the ball was dropped, and then catch the ball next time. Be better. I find it very difficult to look up to leaders like this. When I have tried to address things I have observed with church leaders in person, instead of just talking about it here, it has gone nowhere. I won't get into it too much, but I can say that I have grown more spiritually when I wasn't going to typical church services than when I have gone. Much of the time, if I do learn something in a typical church service, it is learning by example of how not to be, which at least is something, and it is a striking way to learn. But at the same time, if I didn't already know better, if I didn't know that some of the things I've heard are an example of how not to be, if I didn't know that, I could be misled by what I have heard in church services, which is a serious thing. If I didn't already know better, I could be misled. I could think that the wrong things I've heard are right and good, which could lead me astray. I am saddened to think of those who have been led astray by church leaders. More than once, I have had to make the decision to not continue going to some church services for my own welfare. Stop listening to teaching that contradicts what you know is right. Other than growing up spiritually with the Lord as my teacher, the most good I have received from fellow Christians has not been at a typical Sunday morning church service from a pastor. I have benefited from fellow Christians, most of which were not pastors and even said they weren't, and who I met with on some random day at some random time, or met together on a Tuesday night, or who have audio or video recorded their teachings or have written their teachings, and I have been built up from them in that way. I am very thankful for what I have learned from these fellow Christians. It has been very valuable to gain something from them, from what God is doing through them. Looking back on those examples I gave of poor behavior, I think many of them would not have happened if there were more fear of God and humility. I think those two things, fear of God and humility, can help to keep a person from fleshly tendencies. You don't need to regard the flesh. Walk in God's ways. Walk as the new creature that you are. Walk in it in all fullness and in all the liberty it provides, unapologetically. The Lord doesn't call you to placate the flesh. Not only yours, but neither the flesh of others. Love others. That is a command. But God does not call his own to love the flesh, whether it be theirs or the flesh of others. You need not be soft with it or offer it refreshments as if you were being kindly and hospitable with it. The flesh is against God and his ways. It is an enemy, a part of fallen man. It will not inherit God's kingdom, nor have any part in it whatsoever, and it should become less and less of a factor, an influencing factor, in the lives of his own. He does not call you to be kindly to the flesh, yours or others, so do not feel badly at all when you aren't. God sees your frustrations in those who ought to be mature, the leaders in churches, playing around with unworthy things, and even speaking and teaching them amongst the church. He sees it. You are not alone in what you see. You wonder how much they know and fear God. He heard every word. But I tell you that men will give an account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. Would they speak the same if they were aware of God's presence? Yet he is there, and they still say it. God sees the frustrations of hearing infantile speech and ideas coming from those who seem as if they should be mature. They should be mature. God lists the qualifications of deacons, elders, leaders in the church in the Bible. He intends for the shepherds to be mature, not playing around with nonsense. Even more, teaching it. I'm disgusted with carnality in the church. May the depths of it be exposed. I don't care if it hurts anybody's feelings. Each of them know better, and it is not a game. There is more at stake than hurt feelings. This is about more than feelings. God has them shepherding others, and it isn't a game for their flesh. The flesh and its desires do not belong in the church, amongst God's own. He does not desire that any allowance or place be made for it. It is against his ways. Best for his own to view it as the evil it is, instead of viewing it as some kind of sort of bad, but not too bad thing. It is no good at all.